I'm thinking about a new series for the channel, analysing very flawed horror films. Think of calling it Fails from the Crypt. What do you reckon? I want to go with less galaxy-brained and more story-focused analysis. The trouble is there's so many horrors I could go for, it's tough to know where to start, because I want to go for something that you're all going to relate to and something you'll get a lot out of. So I think Necronomicon 1993, directed by Brian Yuzna, Christoph Gans and Shuseike Kanako. What? So first thing, why are there 3 directors? I mean, what is this, The Wizard of Oz? Oh wait, no, it's July now, no one cares about the gays. My bad. Necronomicon has 3 directors because it's an anthology horror film. That's one of my favourite subgenres. It's a collection of shorter stories that's bound into one movie. Typically 3 stories, but sometimes a heck of a lot more. I'll nerd out on that in another video, but let me know in the comments if you're interested. In Necronomicon, all of the stories are inspired by P Lovecraft, and I do emphasise inspired. That's exactly why I sought this out. I am on a total Lovecraft binge at the moment, and I'm having a great time. I also really enjoyed this movie. I saw from the start that Necronomicon is a 6 out of 10 movie that could very easily become a 9 out of 10, with some very simple changes. I'm going to be suggesting those. There are going to be some mild spoilers, but to be honest, nothing major, nothing you're not really expecting. So let's nitpick. Like, some of this is subjective. I've got some minor gripes. For a start, I really wish they could have included a TV screen, because if there are no TV screens for me to hijack, then you have to see my face for the whole video. It's for your benefit as well, guys. I'm just thinking of you. This occurred to me straight away as we were watching it. The first segment of the film, that first story, that should have been the last. It should have been the climax. This first story is called The Deep. This is the one directed by Christoph Gans, and it's nominally inspired by The Rats and the Walls, which I haven't read. I did notice it starting with some dialogue from Dagon, which was very unusual. A giant showy creature feature with excellent effects by Tom Savini. This should be your closer. The audience is engaged at that point, and that's when we kind of expect the big monster reveals. When you put the big showy effects piece first, then it makes the second story seem kind of mild and inconsequential, just less significant overall. So simple move, put the first story to the end. And the second story was easily my favourite. It's closest to the Lovecraft material. That's a story called Cool Air, and of course it stars David Warner, who both you and I know and love from The Omen and In the Mouth of Madness, etc, etc. Now this second story, The Cold, which should have been the first story, it's a simpler story to understand and relate to. It's not too out of the world, so it draws you in much more easily. It's a really good entry point. And while it is a very simple story, it's also got those atypical, disturbing elements and kind of gruesome visuals. The last story of the 3, Whispers, is loosely based on The Whisper in Darkness, and I really emphasise loose here, like Tinder loose. I think if it actually stuck to just adapting The Whisper in Darkness, that would have been very easy, and it would also resolve some of the problems that I'm going to mention later. Whispers is directed by Brian Yuzna of Society fame. Yeah, you can see why he went with that one, and you can very much see his influence. It's full of splatter potential, it's kind of hokey, it's totally his ballpark, and he has a lot of fun with it. So as with the first story, The Deep, the problem is it's Lovecraftian but not actually Lovecraft. So for me, we could improve it just by making it closer to the original material. Very simple fix. There's lots of ways we could do that without resorting to doing a straight adaptation of The Whisperer in Darkness itself, although I would also really like that. So I think we could improve it by injecting some classic P Lovecraft framing. So imagine a kind of classic Lovecraft opening where we start with our protagonist in the morgue, on a tray, under a sheet, and 2 side characters are then discussing how the protagonist has ended up there. We could follow our soon-to-be deceased protagonist for a while and dip out with the partner who then reports what he saw, and the really nasty stuff could be relayed via the police radio. Lovecraft achieved really great results just by implying things and giving scant details of disgusting creatures and letting your brain do the rest. The protagonist talking over the radio could achieve that. It would be more original and also closer to the Lovecraft material that was worth very loosely adapting. And there is kind of an irony here that I have to focus on. It's that While H.P. Lovecraft is all about implying things and leaving lots to the imagination, Brian Yuzna is much more uninhibited, let's say. Look, I love his gory, gooey latex monstrosities, but the dude is not subtle. It is it's quite a weird mismatch that Brian Yuzna is directing some H.P. Lovecraft stuff. I can't quite get over that. So let's get back to that first story, The Deep, the one I said should be booted all the way to the end and used as the finale. The Deep is essentially a monkey's paw tale. It's two men in the same bloodline who use the Necronomicon to resurrect their deceased loved ones. Going to popular culture, if people know of H.P. Lovecraft, the thing they know is probably Cthulhu, deep sea horrors, old ones. Don't give people this thing that they're expecting and wanting and probably bought their ticket for. Don't give them that straight away. Build up the anticipation. That's another reason this should be the finale. Now, it is a story that's most directly linked to the eponymous Necronomicon. That is, the Necronomicon is actually used in this story. That's another reason The Deep should have come last. Sort of similar to Whispers, my problem is kind of that too much is shown, but it's a lot more that too much is shown too soon. So for an example, this creature here, the old fisherman, it looks great. I mean, the whole film looks great, but we're seeing everything too quickly. Build up some anticipation before we actually see what the creature looks like. Just wait a minute or two. He's got a hood. Use that to hide things. Have the dude working in shadow. Build up anticipation before you pay off. Making better use of the setup and payoff would have these really good effects that Tom Savini's worked on. It would make them so much more impactful. Interestingly, as Christoph Gans would later do with Pyramid Head in Silent Hill, he's bringing this very iconic character that has a lot of name recognition to the screen. But he does that entirely out of the character's context. It's basically misusing the character. Now, from the chants and inscriptions, this is meant to be Cthulhu, but it's showing too much. It's showing too much too soon without the build-up. Build up the anticipation and set the scene. So, for instance, they have this set that they've built under the floorboards. I think it looks great. It's waterlogged. It's really creepy. Make use of it. Have the main character, Edward here, go down there. Make him go down there. Force him to go down there to get the Necronomicon. Have him hear things while he's down there. Build up that anticipation. Foreshadow this creature. Maybe instead of being something as iconic as Cthulhu, it could be more like the real true form of the old fisherman that we were very briefly introduced to earlier. So when that gorgeously made, creepy as heck creature rises at the end, it's more established, we're hungry to see it. And that is just better storytelling. But it wouldn't exactly be Lovecraftian. See, Howard Phillips Lovecraft, he wasn't a fan of happy endings. He denies easy satisfaction and victories the way he denies simple descriptions of his monstrosities that you could categorize. He likes to keep the horrors beyond comprehension, and he loves a downer ending. So I've got to put my foot down here. No happy ending in this story. Let this main character, Edward Delaporte, leave a note saying he's joining his wife and have him follow her down into the creature's maw. Maybe let him be driven mad by the abomination that he's summoned who's wearing his wife's skin, and as he realizes that he's released some eldritch demons, let him just run in fear downstairs and then be devoured by the thing under the floorboards. No happy ending, darn it. This is Lovecraft we're talking about. All those changes massively improved the film for me. But we also have major issues with the wraparound story, that is the library. This is the story that frames all the other stories we're seeing in the anthology. It has to both set those up, keep you interested, and deliver a kick on its own. So, very boldly, and bear in mind, this is already a film that's got a heck of a lot of moxie. This film opens with H.P. Lovecraft himself. It is set in 1932. He is played by horror sweetheart Jeffrey Combs, who you may know from such hits as Would You Rather and Reanimator, itself another Lovecraft adaptation. This H.P. Lovecraft discovers a copy of the Necronomicon is being held in a temple in the city. Okay. The monks let him in to use their library, and he pretty much immediately sneaks off to try and access the locked away Necronomicon and begin reading the 3 stories that will fill the film. Do you see the immediate problem there? No, not his distracting resemblance to Bruce Campbell, that's just a bonus, but H.P. Lovecraft reading accounts of things that clearly occurred decades after this framing story is set in 1932. That's a bad premise. It's confusing. And also, why are the monks so chill when they find out he snuck away to read the Necronomicon? Bad framing. Our new improved premise is that Lovecraft turns up wanting to read these obscure texts, these obscure stories of visionaries and prophets, whatever lets the stories happen in the future. Although it would be a lot easier to not modernize the stories in the first place. Now, he reads the tales in their obscure texts, because why would spooky stories be in the Necronomicon? That's not what it contains. As the Deep shows us, the Necronomicon is a powerful, forbidden, dark, magical tome. It's not one of Algernon Blackwood's collection. Come on. Instead, as basically already happens, we're going to get a sense over the course of the film of what the Necronomicon is. By the time we reach the Deep in the finale now, we'll have a good understanding. At that point, when we get back to the framing story, we'll have an understanding of how dangerous and powerful the Necronomicon is. And that is when we learn that H.P. Lovecraft is actually truly at the library to steal it. It's not a huge change in story, actually. It's making that reveal more powerful by putting it at the end of the story when we've got context for everything. Have H.P. Lovecraft be devious. Have him betray monks who saw him as harmless and trusted him. Have him escape and begin to hear the same whispers that Edward heard in the Deep. Because that would be a pretty cool sequel setup. I would watch. It's way too long a topic for this video, but a great framing story gives you that surprise, ideally using information that it fed you over the course of the other stories. This would do that. As a Necronomicon's prominence increases over the course of the stories, you get that idea of what it really means. You know, as basically already happens, reference it as a source of forbidden information in part 1, mention it somewhere else in part 2, maybe a dangerous cult were looking for it in a past case. Then actually show it being used in part 3, The Deep, before revealing that Lovecraft in the framing story was actually looking to steal it all along. You know, I'm not a great writer. Oh, no, come on. You flatter me. No, don't be silly. I like purple prose. I overwrite. And it's definitely easier to critique and nitpick than make something yourself. But I wanted to show how I think some very simple story changes could make the most of what a film already has, without piling on a whole amount to the budget or massively extending the film. It just required a little more in the way of setup and payoff, and a little bit of anticipation building. And for my own personal tastes, they could have at least had a microfiche reader in the library. I have no screens to work with here. It's terrible. That was the first fails from the Crypt. If you enjoyed it, let me know. If you've got other fixes, put them in the comments. And most definitely, if you have not already done so, subscribe to this channel. I am a tiny channel. Every new subscriber is an absolute delight. Motivates me, keeps me peppy. That's all from me. Cheers, y'all.